So yeah, thanks again for joining in. Today's topic, today's webinar is going to be on fpAccountant, so QuickBooks integration, everything to do with QuickBooks integration. And I have my wonderful co-presenter, my webinar producer, as I like to call it, Sophia Wilson, joining me on the call today. Sophia, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Mark, thanks again for having me today. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound really good. We're testing out some new headsets here, so we're hoping. Well, Sophia is. I'm not. I'm still on my tried and true headset, but I think it might be time for a replacement. All right. So a couple things I was mentioned. Sophia, wonderful colleague of mine, not related. The last name is a coincidence, although I'm sure you can find a connection if you go back far enough. But let's take a look at our agenda today. So we're going to be looking at setting up fpAccountant for QuickBooks Desktop integration, and we're going to be looking at setting up QuickBooks Online integration. The time that it's going to take to distinguish between those is going to be pretty quick because they're very, very similar. So it's really just the first couple steps where there's a difference in how it's set up, and then we'll be taking a look at use, and I'll show some of the differences there as well. But it's very easy to cover both of these in the webinar because they're so similar. The differences are pretty minor, and it's really easy for me to point them out. So that's why we like to do both in the same webinar. We're then going to take a look at the kind of the basics of the setup, like the most important aspects, linking your services to your QuickBooks income items, and linking your expenses to your cost of goods sold accounts and income items for the purpose of billing your clients. We're then going to look at syncing some invoices and expenses and seeing the system in action. But you know, this webinar today is really focused on, you know, as the title kind of alludes to, the setups and the setup and the basics of fpAccountant. That's not to say that there wouldn't be any benefit if you've already done the setup, especially if you have any kind of questions about it, or you know, or if you're maybe curious how some of it works. Lots of good information. But we do actually have a webinar next week, and we'll talk about that in a second. Sorry, not next week, 2 weeks from now. That might be a little bit more up your alley if you're more of an advanced user. As always, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them using the GoToWebinar question panel. So there's a little box there you can type in your questions. Sophia is going to be answering any and all questions that she can. Any questions that we should be showing on screen, I will be doing so or attempting to do so. I'll be checking in with Sophia every once in a while just to see if there's any questions that we should be demonstrating. Anything that we can't answer, which is more common with these accounting specific webinars, although still pretty rare, but anything that we can't answer, you know, we'll of course follow up with you via email and provide you with the information later on. A few other resources that I always point out around skill development, learning, training, so I'm going to point those out really quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. And then, as I mentioned, as I you know, was hinting about, we have the next session happening on the 4th of May, so 2 weeks from today, is an interactive webinar on fpAccountant. We've done this once before. We're doing it again in 2 weeks. And right now, you know, this is supposed to be kind of a limited participation, well, limited number of people with a high level of participation, but I'm not going to cap it this time. So I think we have about 20, 25 people in there right now, which is what we limited it to last time. But we're not going to limit it this time, so you can, you know, the more the merrier. That is an interactive session, so I'll be, you know, we'll be calling on some people to maybe ask some questions or maybe even answer some questions. You'll be able to put your hand up and you'll be mic'd up. You'll be able to talk to, you know, amongst yourselves, to myself, and it's a more kind of give and take webinar on the actual usage of fpAccountant. So, you know, sometimes there might be questions that I might be stumped about where, you know, one of, you know, another user of Function Point might know the answer to. So we're looking to do a lot more of these types of sessions in the very near future. We're going to be planning you know, a few other topics that'll have the same type of style. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. Looking forward to doing that. And as always, like us on Facebook, tweet us on Twitter, check out our Pinterest board, connect with us on LinkedIn, watch our YouTube videos, including the recording of the video that we're taking today, and then also do whatever this thing's telling you to do as well. On the topic of recording, I do have my wonderful colleague involved in the webinar, Caitlin, today, and I believe that Caitlin is recording the webinar. And actually, I'm not sure if Caitlin is mic'd up, but let's see here. You know what, I'm not sure. I think I might hit record because I'm not entirely sure. Actually, you know what? Why don't we do this? Sophie, if you want to do me a favor, you can go check and see if Caitlin's recording that. Oh, the session's being recorded. Okay, great. So all my fumbling over this recording will be on the YouTube video. And as always, that will be sent out to all the participants afterwards. So yeah, keep your eyes open for that. All right, so I do expect this to go for about an hour today. You know, we'll be done at 1 o'clock Pacific time, and I don't expect to be going over that. And depending on how many questions, we might actually finish it up a little bit earlier. So let's get into the actual work here. I have a version of Function Point open in front of you that is a demonstration version that I use almost exclusively for these webinars. And I keep the system pretty simple for that purpose. Now, I'm actually running Windows on a Mac, so I'm using a program called Parallels so that I'm able to run a Windows machine virtually on my Mac, my MacBook that I use, for the purpose of integrating with QuickBooks for PC. You are able to integrate with QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks for PC. Unfortunately, QuickBooks for Mac doesn't allow the opportunity for you know, third-party developers like ourselves to develop an SDK, you know, software development kit to actually run the integration. So there's a limitation there. So you can use a Mac, you just have to run Windows on the Mac to run that integration. So the first thing that we're going to look at is setting up the integration on the installed side. Then we're going to look at the online side, and we're going to be going back and forth a little bit. So if you're using online, you're still going to want to check this out. Don't look away. It's only going to be a minute before we touch on that. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get logged into Function Point, and you're going to want to get logged into QuickBooks. And I have both of those open here. So here's my QuickBooks, and then here's my Function Point here. You're going to want to go to a web page. So you're going to want to go to qb.functionpoint.com. When you go to qb.functionpoint.com, you're going to see a link here that's going to allow you to download the integration file. This is called fpAccountant. And actually, I think there might be even a new version coming out for that pretty soon. So when you select this, it's going to take you through an installation wizard. It's very, very simple. You know, install the program, put it somewhere on your computer where you're going to be able to find it. Really, really simple stuff. Once you install, go through that installation wizard, you're going to end up with fpAccountant, which looks like this. And the icon, if you install it on your desktop, I'll show that here, looks like this. It's fpAccountant version 2.exe. Let's get everything back open here. So once you have that installed, what you're going to want to do is go into integration and set up FP credentials. When you set up your FP credentials, the URL is the same URL that you use up here in your Function Point system. And odds are that's going to be helium.functionpoint.com. If you're in another part of the world, so I believe if you're in Australia, for example, then you're working off gold.functionpoint.com, you know, depending on your location, but most likely you're using Helium. The company name is the company name that you use to log into your system, and the username and password is the same as what you use to log into Function Point. And the username and password needs to belong to someone who has admin access. You know, just to be safe, 100% admin access. You know, the person dealing with the accounting integration should be able to do anything in Function Point. You can have other people interacting with this, that's not a problem, but the username and password needs to be that of someone who has full 100% access. Save that, and you're good to go. Once you have done that, the next thing that you need to do is you need to set up the QuickBooks integration file path, the QuickBooks file path in your Function Point system. So you're going to want to go into Function Point, and you're going to want to go into Admin, System Setup, and Office Preferences. In Office Preferences, the accounting package, you're going to want to change to fpAccountant V2. Now, there is a slight chance that you're not going to see this here. The reason for that is that, you know, perhaps you're not subscribed to fpAccountant yet, so, you know, maybe you're brand new to the integration and you haven't, you know, contacted us to get it set up yet. Yeah, I mean, that's really the only circumstance. If you started Function Point and you signed up for the integration right away, then you should see fpAccountant version 2 here. If for whatever reason you don't, just send a quick email to support@functionpoint.com, and you will, it'll be really quick. We'll turn that right on for you in a couple seconds. So fpAccountant version 2. Once you've done that, well, refresh the browser, and you're going to see a page here that says Integrate Accounting. Under this, you're going to see Set QuickBooks File Path. So this is step 2. The first step is downloading fpAccountant and putting in your credentials. You then need to set the QuickBooks File Path. The file path is the location of the QuickBooks company file on the computer that it's installed on. So here's my file path here. I'm going to show you how to find yours. So in QuickBooks, the easiest way to go about this is to actually open the program up. And in this case, I'm going to press Function F2. And now I just realized that I actually can't remember what the key command is if you're running on a PC. On a Mac, it's Function F2. I believe it's Control F2. Or you know what, it might just be press F2. Yeah, I think that's what it is actually. Just press F2 if you're working on a PC. But the point is that you need the file location of the QuickBooks company file. And that is not the location of the icon for QuickBooks, because you might just find the icon. What I mean by that is if you look at the icon here, that's not the location of the company file. You need to actually find the location of the company file. So I believe this is my company file here. You could find it by going into Start and searching for programs, and finding it that way. So I could go local disk here, program files. I believe I'd find it in here, Intuit, QuickBooks. So I'm finding it that way. But an easier way to go about it is to just open up QuickBooks and again just click or just press Function F2 or just F2 if you're on a PC, and you're going to find that file path right here. So copy that. Yes, I do. There we go. So copy that and then drop it into your QB file location here, and then save that. Once you have done those two things, you've set the QB file location and you've set up the FP credentials, the next and very important step is to open up fpAccountant and select Run Full Sync. You'll notice it says Run Only if requested by an FP employee. That process of running that full sync could take anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours to 4 hours, maybe even longer, depending on how much data you have in your QuickBooks company file. So it's really important that you do that at the end of the day, when you don't really have to be interacting with QuickBooks. Once you hit Run Full Sync, it's okay if you work within Function Point, but you should not be working within QuickBooks. So leave it alone, let it do its thing, come in the morning, and it'll be run for you. Once you've done that, we then actually get into the establishing the integration and linking the items. And at this juncture, I'm going to catch us up on the QuickBooks Online portion of it. So I'm going to take a step back. We're going to look at QuickBooks Online and show you how to get to where we are now with the online version. And at that time, the process will be identical for both. So the setup at that junction is the same for both systems. It's just these very first few steps are a little bit different. Before we take a look at that QuickBooks Online process, Sophie, any questions that we should address on screen at this time?
Hi, Mark. No, not a lot of questions so far. We have just had a comment from Catherine that you're going a little quickly, so if you don't mind slowing down a bit, that would be greatly appreciated.
For sure. I appreciate the comment, Catherine, and that's actually a problem that I've always had. And I try so hard to fix it, but I seem to struggle with it. So let's take a look at the online version. But before I do, in fact, I'm just going to recap here really quickly. So again, you're going to qb.functionpoint.com. You're selecting the file, the link here. It's going to download the file for you. Once you've downloaded the file, gone through the installation wizard, set up your credentials. It's really easy. It's just going to ask for company, username, and password, and the URL. It's all right there for you. Set the QuickBooks file path in Function Point. And once you've done those two things, you would then run the full sync. Now with the online version, it's a little bit different. Not all that much different, actually, and it gets pretty similar once you get to a certain point. So with the online version, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you're logged into Function Point and that you're, of course, logged into QuickBooks Online. Let's go back to home here. So once you are logged into both Function Point and QuickBooks Online, you're going to want to go into Admin, System Setup, and Office Preferences, just like before. And here, what you're going to find is you're going to be set up to manual entry. Let's actually go through this process. We're going to do it live. So you're going to find yourself set up to manual entry. You want to change this to integrated QuickBooks Online. Not QuickBooks Online third party. That's an old way of working with it. That's not actually a full integration. Back in the day when QuickBooks Online was very, very first released. So you don't want that. You want integrated QuickBooks Online. Select that and submit. Once you do, it's actually going to prompt you through the next steps, and it's really easy. Select Connect to QuickBooks, and it's going to ask you to authorize it. This is QuickBooks asking you, is it okay for Function Point to interact with your accounting software? So, you know, it said Function Point software there. That's the name of the company. You know, it would say the name of your agency, and it's asking you to authorize that integration. It's then going to go through a bit of a process here. We have successfully synced the two systems, and that's it. So, you know, that's the entire process. You're just changing the accounting package option and then authorizing it. So you don't really need to do anything else. That catches us up to the installed version, which I'm actually going to go back to now. Again, it's pretty much identical, the process here moving forward. So once you've gone through those first few steps, we're then getting into the important part. This is where we're getting into the setup of the QuickBooks integration. I'm going to start to talk about, you know, what the setup is, how it interacts, why it's set up the way that it is, and then we're going to look at the end process of what the data looks like when you sync it over. But, you know, understanding this area of the system, it really helps you to understand how the integration is operating and what it's meant to be doing. So again, admin, integrated accounting, set up QuickBooks integration. And here you want to go through every tab and review every field in every tab. So, you know, for example, you start off at general, and most of this you don't really want to change. The way with the PO number format is, you know, it says recommended, so you probably don't really want to change that. You know, that is the easiest way to make sure that there's not possible to have any duplicates. You know, the expense mapping, you know, expense items, it's the proper way to go. You don't really want to change that. And then the way that the QB job name format is coming over, again, I just recommend leaving that the same. The deposit item is meant for doing deposit invoices in Function Point, and the purpose of the deposit invoice is for the value of the invoice to go into QuickBooks as unearned revenue. So that is mapping to an item that is tied to a liability account. It represents unearned revenue. If you don't see something here and you've been using QuickBooks for a while, then odds are you're not operating in accrual accounting practice. You're probably using, you know, more of a kind of a cash-based way of operating, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. If this is jumping out at you as something that's important because you do work in an accrual environment and you do track unearned revenue, then you're going to find a value in this drop-down because you would have been doing it so far. So just, you know, map it to the appropriate item. There's probably just going to be one, and then save it. The next thing we have is the option to map to classes, and I'm actually going to hold off on that. I'm going to come back to that, talk about classes a little bit later, towards the end of this particular page. But we'll save that tab. You know, you'll notice I didn't make any changes here, and then all we're doing is we're just going through tab by tab and reviewing the information and saving. So accounts receivable, map to accounts receivable. That's going to happen in yours as well. Really simple. Accounts payable, map to accounts payable. Services, this is where we have a very important aspect of the connection, very important mapping going on here. What you're going to see is a list of your internal services, a list of your external expenses, and your internal expenses. Each of these need to be mapped to income items for the purpose of billing your client. In any case of an exact match, so, you know, administrative, well, actually, I think I did that manually earlier. Yeah, so where you're not getting, I set this up to kind of look like it would when you first set it up, and I reversed those two. But when you do get an exact match, it's going to map it for you. So it's going to look something like this. Now, account service, I happen to have an income item in QuickBooks called account services. And actually, it's one letter off there, so it wouldn't have been mapped. Administrative, I do not have a QB income item called administrative, so I need to map it to something. So I'm going to map it to account services. Copywriting, design. Those were an exact match. The system did it for me. I have a line item here called digital. I do not have a QuickBooks income item called digital. So I need to map it to something. I'm going to map it to web development. And I'm just going through, and anywhere where I see select a QB income item, I need to then map it to something. So you don't want any blank spaces here. You're probably going to have services like non-billable issues or sick time or things like that. You know, whether or not you map those things is really up to you. Probably doesn't matter, but I always recommend doing it anyways, just in case. You know, who knows? Maybe one day you'll bill for the non-billable time. You never really know. So I recommend mapping everything here just to be safe. Save that, and we then move into the next tab. So if you have any questions on that we should talk about at this time?
You know what? Lots of great questions coming in. I think these are all things that I'm going to have to take offline outside of the webinar, though, but thanks for checking in.
No problem. Are they kind of specific to the agency, less generic and more kind of just like a specific situational question?
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm probably just going to have to connect with a few people outside of here to help them go through their integration specifically.
Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, sometimes the questions can be a bit situational or circumstantial, maybe I should put it. So we might not be able to answer them on screen, but do know that we will follow up. Please continue bombarding Sophie with as many questions as you have. All right, so on the expenses, we're mapping the external expenses to income items for the purpose of billing your client. And you know what, I just thought of something. I want to take a quick second just to point out the fact that the online version, so when we look at the online version, everything here is exactly the same. So, if you're using QuickBooks Online, if you're sitting there thinking, hey, he's not touching on that, he's just looking at the installed version, only those first few steps and then a little bit of the usage towards the end, which I'll point out, are different. Everything else is identical. So you'll notice the tabs are identical. All the information and the way that this is mapped is exactly the same. So everything is relevant. So the external expenses, they're mapped to income items for the purpose of billing your client. So if we purchase some printing, that's going to go to an income item for printing. And now if I didn't have it, then I'd map it to something else. It's also mapped to a cost of goods sold account for the purpose of paying your vendor. So freelancer happen to be mapped, and same with photography and printing. But media, I don't have a cost of goods sold for media, so I'm going to put it. You'll notice that my cost of goods sold is pretty limited, so I'm going to put it to freelancer for now, and we'll save that. Now, how this is mapped is really up to you. A lot of people like a one-to-one mapping. They like the services in Function Point to be identical to the items in QuickBooks. That's not always realistic, and it may not always be, the best suited for you. I was speaking with an agency. It was on Monday, I believe, and they were telling me how, for themselves, they have literally two income items. One that is production income, so for all their expenses, and the other is sales income for everything else. Their service structure in Function Point is more detailed, provides more depth, but they're mapped to a very simplified income item structure. So this is the option that you have when setting up this integration, to be as little direct one-to-one mapping or more generic if you prefer. And then the internal expenses, you're mapping those to income items for the purpose of, again, billing your clients. The next thing we have is taxes. Taxes is a really important one. Your taxes are, of course, dependent upon where you are geographically. If you never have taxes on your invoices, then you're going to have an item here called no taxes. And well, that's going to be there no matter what. No taxes needs to be mapped to a non-taxable tax code. Now, I happen to also be using the Canadian version of this, and in the American version, you're going to see two extra tabs right here, 1 and 2, and those are to tax groups and tax items. And those all need to be mapped. So if you have no taxes drop down that is empty, you need to create that thing. So for example, there's a tab here that's called QB Tax Groups in the US version. When you go in there, sometimes I'll see a case where there is no tax exempt QB tax group because you haven't set one up in QuickBooks because you haven't needed one until now. You need to go and create one, run a sync, and then map it to that appropriate non-tax item. So if you have no taxes, again, it's really important that this is still mapped, otherwise it won't work. The taxes that you do have, if you have any, of course, should be mapped to the appropriate tax codes. So I'm just going to go through this and make sure that this is looking good. Yes, it is, and then save that. Now, I've seen some wild stuff in the past, like county situations. So if you have 30 different counties that you work with, and each county has a different tax code, then you need to set those up as tax groups in Function Point. You need to set those up as tax codes in QuickBooks, and you need to map them all. Now, sometimes it's not really necessary. If you have, 10 different counties that all have a tax rate of 7%, you could just call that tax group 7%. But if in QuickBooks you have it all separated out by county, then you'll want to do the same in Function Point. So however much detail you need, start in QuickBooks, and then as far as the taxes are concerned, and then recreate that in Function Point. So if any questions on the taxes at all?
No, I have not any questions on the taxes. However, I did get a question that I'm so sorry I missed what you said. Are we currently using the Canadian or American QuickBooks for this presentation?
I'm on the Canadian version, and really the only difference is this tax item. So you're going to see two extra tabs here related to taxes. Tax groups, for example, is one of them. So the U.S. version requires tax groups. The Canadian version doesn't. It's pretty simple. You'll most likely have it in there already. If you don't, you'll need to create a no tax group in QuickBooks.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so from there, you want to look at our payment terms and just map them to the appropriate terms. So net 30, due, net 60, net 60. Now, something that our support team gets from time to time is your payment terms in QuickBooks. They need to be set up correctly. They can't just. It doesn't matter what the label is. You need to actually go into those payment terms and make sure that they have if it's labeled net 60, make sure that it's set up to be net 60. Sometimes we'll have people email our support team and say, hey, the aging on this invoice is off. But if you don't have your payment terms set up correctly in QuickBooks, then none of this really matters, because in Function Point it is mostly just a label. Whereas in QuickBooks, there's functionality behind it, so it needs to be mapped appropriately. 9 out of 10 cases, this all is very moot. It doesn't matter. I'm sure you have your payment terms set up correctly, but if you see any issues there with invoice aging, check your QuickBooks payment terms. And then expense payment terms as well. So when you pay your expenses. Good thing to be saving every tab as you go through. Something I always recommend. And then payment methods being the last one. This will most likely be mapped for you already, but if it isn't, then just map it appropriately. And that's really the gist of the setup. I'm going to touch on classes now. So you are able to sync the classes with service groups in Function Point. And classes is something that's kind of interesting. Classes are so often used for so many different things. I actually Googled this one time, and I found article after article of people saying, what is the purpose of classes? No one really knows. They're used for different things all the time. So I see classes used for things like tracking different industry types. I see it used for tracking different internal departments. Very often I see that. A whole variety of different ways that you can use classes. It's basically just like a reporting label. Now the classes are going to be mapped to your service groups in Function Point. The service groups are these categories of services that you use to create estimates, jobs, and in turn invoices. Now, because of the way that this works, if your classes are tracking something that would make sense as a service group, then you're fine. If they don't, then you have a bit of a problem. So let me give you some examples of that. And one example is, let's say industry type. So, if I work with 4 different major industries, and I work with hospitality, I work with technology, healthcare, and I don't know, whatever the fourth one might be, coffee bean roasters. Then the service groups could each be specific to the industry. That works. You set up your service groups to accommodate your class structure. The problem is when there's an overlap. So, for example, I see some cases where it's used to track internal departments, which in a lot of the times is fine as well. The income that goes under the services within the category is going to go to that class. But if you have a case where a line item might be relevant to multiple classes all at the same time in a single job, these are the types of cases where it can get a little bit tricky if there's overlap happening there. So really, a way to know if this is going to work for you is just to look at your service groups and ask yourself, can each of these be mapped to one of my classes? And if not, can I modify them to make them map to one of my classes? And would it make sense if I did so? So that's how that mapping is working. And when we look at the QuickBooks integration, and if we were to enable this, you're going to see the service groups option open up. And here we can then map each of our service groups to the appropriate classes. And I'm actually going to turn that off. Okay, I already did. So yes, I'm gonna leave that off for now. So that's how classes works. It's mapped to the service group. Totally fine and useful if you want to do it and it works for you, but sometimes can cause a little bit of a issue if there's overlap that you can't overcome. The next thing that we're going to look at is actually the process of syncing these invoices and these expenses. Sophie, I can see you kind of typing away there. I hate to interrupt you, but I want to check and see if there's anything else that you think we should address.
No, everything looks really good so far. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, great. So I know there's a lot of questions coming in. I'm kind of seeing them pop in here and there, so I'm sure Sophie's doing a great job answering those. And then it sounds like some of those are going to be taken offline as well, so we will follow up with you afterwards and provide you with the information that you're looking for. All right, so let's go ahead and actually start working with some of this. Let's create an invoice and sync it over. Anytime that I'm messing around with this integration and changing things and adjusting it and things like that, I'm doing things that you really shouldn't need to be doing that often. When you first set up the integration and you sync it and you get a successful sync, you don't really have to adjust it much after that. This is the job I want. Things like changing income items. If you change your income item structure or your cost of goods sold structure or something like that, then of course you need to go in and adjust the mapping to reflect that. But that's not really something that an agency is going to be doing once every couple of months. Once you have a structure, you generally want to kind of run with it. You shouldn't be back there in the integrated accounting area too much. This is mostly just like a one-time setup, and then you run with it from there. So let's go ahead and create an invoice for this job. So I have this job here called Iced Coffee Promo Posters, and it's for my client Trees Organic Coffee, and I have it estimated for $7,437.50. And I'm going to add an invoice for 50%. I'm going to make this really simple. I'm going to say 50%, and let's put a tax group in there just to show the taxes and how they come over. Just to complicate things a little bit. All right, so we have the invoice, and then we have an invoice that's 50% of our estimate. Notice the tax here, so it's showing as our 5%. Now, notice also the services and their income item. The blue line is letting you know this is a required field. If any of these were not mapped, then it would be blank, and if I tried to do something like save it, it's going to tell you, hey, you can't because that is not mapped. And it wouldn't let me post it. It's not going to let me sync. It's not going to let me do anything unless this is mapped. But it's nice to see that you can map it on the fly, so you're not going to be handcuffed and unable to work if you forgot to map something or if it was mapped incorrectly. So we have our invoice, and up at the top we're going to select to post invoice. Now, the difference between the installed version and the online version is this next process that you're about to see. We're going to take a look at the invoice now for the installed version. We're going to switch to the online version immediately after and look at the slight difference there. Once this is posted, it's ready to be synced with QuickBooks. Now, you might have a variety of invoices and expenses that are all ready to go over, and you might sync maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. I'd recommend not doing it not taking any longer than that. Once a week's pretty good. You could even do it once a day if you wanted to, but you don't want to do it once a month. You want to have it more consistent. Unless you just do invoicing, on the last day of every month, and that's the only invoicing you ever do, then of course just doing it once a month makes sense. But regular syncing is a good practice to get into. So once you've posted it, you're going to open up fpAccountant, so that program that we had installed on our computer, and you're going to choose to synchronize with FP. Now this is going to pick up all the posted items and drop them into QuickBooks. You can actually watch them start to appear in QuickBooks if you wanted to. The process is usually pretty quick. If you get any issues or any problems, they're going to jump out at you. So anytime I'm doing something like this, especially if I'm mucking around in the admin section and making changes and things like that, I'm always kind of crossing my fingers that I didn't make any mistakes. If I did, then it would tell me so. In this case, it's saying, hey, things are okay, and they're completed. So I know that everything worked out just fine. When I go into QuickBooks, I'm looking for invoice 1010-0, and this is actually a bit of a change, almost like a new feature in a way I'm going to point out here. If I go down to Trees Organic Coffee, if I click on the customer, I'm going to find invoice 1010-0. So here it is here. I can open it up, and here's my items, account service, and my service. Account service, design, copy, account services, project management. There's a case where it's not a one-to-one match. I mapped it a little bit differently. Notice the taxes down at the bottom there. So there's our 5%. And so we have our invoice in there. So that's great. Now the thing that I said was a little bit different. Go back here. Let's just close this down. I'm a bad navigator when it comes to QuickBooks. Okay, so the thing that's different is you'll notice that there are some jobs beneath Trees Organic. I have 2 of them, but one of the jobs you're not seeing there is Iced Coffee promo posters. In the past, anytime you synced an invoice, it would also sync the job. Now, we had a lot of people telling us, hey, that's not good for me. I just want the invoice to go directly to the customer. I don't need 1,000 jobs in QuickBooks. It's too much. And as you can see here, all the jobs coming in does make the data start to expand. Other companies really want the job. You now have the option for both. By default, it's going to only go to the company. You're not going to get the job here. If you want the job to go into QuickBooks, you just need to send an email to support@functionpoint.com and request that gets changed, and then the system will then send the jobs over. I think most people I talk to don't want the job, but if you want the job, of course you can get it, but the option to not have it is new. So I know that there's a lot of people that are going to be really happy about that because they don't want all the jobs in QuickBooks. So it goes directly to the company, and our invoice is now in. Now, any changes that you need to make should be made in Function Point. So, for example, close everything down. So you don't want the invoice open. The invoice cannot be open. It has to be closed in QuickBooks. But if I need to make a change to that invoice, I would come to the invoice in Function Point. It's going to tell me that it's been exported. Let's say in this case, I want to up the percentage to 60%. Let's just make it a really simple change here. So 60%. And of estimated, up the value to 4685, save that, and then notice that it's out of sync. So it immediately goes into the status of out of sync, and all I need to do is choose to synchronize. So whenever you're editing these invoices, the next time you choose to synchronize, it's going to then bring over those changes. You could do that immediately, or you could hold off and do it later on. So again, that's going to take about a minute. We're going to get that OK message at the bottom there. So quick because I'm just sending one. And when we open up QuickBooks here and we look at Trees Organic, here is our invoice, and notice that the value has changed. So it's adjusting the item automatically. So you make the changes in Function Point. However, there is one circumstance in which the information goes back the other direction, and that is payment. So if I go into this invoice and I choose to receive a payment, and let's see here, so I put in a check number, applied payment amount. I think I'm doing this right. Save and close. Okay, balance due, there we go. Save and close. So we've now submitted the payment, and it's been paid. So once it's been paid, we would then synchronize again. And this isn't something that you're typically going to do one by one. You're going to sync once a week, and it's all of these things that have been occurring, payments, changes, new invoices, they're all going to communicate over to QuickBooks, and the payments come back anytime that you run that sync. So we should get that okay right there. And then when we look at Function Point and we navigate back to that invoice, we're going to find it with a balance. Here we go, payment amount $46.77, payment method check. When we look at the job, we're going to see the balance is 0. So you're creating the invoice in Function Point, you're syncing it. You need to make any changes, you make the change in Function Point, you sync it. You receive a payment, you receive the payment in QuickBooks like you always would, for standard, payment processes here. And then you would sync that and it goes back into Function Point. That's kind of the end-to-end invoicing processes. For the online version, it's slightly different, and I'm going to show the differences right now. Pretty similar though. Sophie, any questions that we should address at this time?
Actually, there is just one question from Becky that I'm typing out, but it would be way more fun if you showed it. She just wanted to confirm how you get to that sync with the QuickBooks Online screen. So I'm assuming it's the sync button on the invoice as well as the one in the admin section.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at that. So let's go into QuickBooks Online, and you'll notice I'm still in the setup, and I'm just going to go through and map these kind of last items that I didn't have mapped there, and just make sure that this is all good. I was about to say copacetic. My girlfriend hates that word. And anytime she somehow trained me to not use it. She's almost trained me to find it annoying myself as well. I don't know where I picked it up, but I started calling things copacetic at some point, and yeah, I got flack for it, so I've changed that. Actually, I just noticed something that I want to point out. As I was going through and I was saving all these tabs, making sure that they were copacetic, I noticed that the taxes tab, actually I'm using the American version for the online. So this is the difference with the taxes tab. When you use the taxes tab, you're going to notice here that we have the additional 2 tabs, including your tax groups. So the tax item group in QuickBooks. So it's very important that a value exists here for the no taxes item. So if it doesn't exist, you need to go create the tax item group. So that's the difference there. But otherwise, everything looks good. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create an invoice. So if I navigate to a job here, I have a job for my client, Pete's Meat Butcher Shop. This is a fantastic deli down the street from our office. They do really good Cubano sandwiches. So I have a job here. I'm going to invoice it. Same process as before. Let's do an invoice for 50%. And add that. We'll do this one with no taxes. We do the other one with taxes. Once you have the invoice created, with the online version, the difference is that you sync each one as you create them. So instead of a button that says posted, it says export. So when I select it with the online version, again, I know I was kind of sounding like a broken record, but everything is almost exactly the same between the 2 versions. Here's one of the main differences once it's set up is that you're choosing to export invoice. You generally want to have QuickBooks open another tab in the browser when you're doing this. And then so since we do, we can go in here and take a look at it. And here's Pete's Meat Butcher Shop. And here is the what invoice we're looking for. Invoice 1007-1. And here is 1007-1. So here it is here. So we create the invoice in Function Point, we export it. It goes into QuickBooks Online. It's all very instantaneous, actually. It's really nice. If you need to make a change, you make the change in Function Point, and then you select Export again. So it's just like what we just looked at a second ago. Again, you make the change in Function Point, you export it. If you want to receive a payment, you would receive the payment in QuickBooks. So let's receive that payment. Okay, that looks good. I do save it, yeah, save and close. There we go. Payment received. So we've received the payment. Now this is something that is a little bit different that does need to be done in the online version. So with the online version, in order to have the payments come back in from QuickBooks, you actually need to go into the admin section, into the Setup QuickBooks integration, and you need to select Perform Full Sync with QuickBooks. That's going to bring all of the payments back over. It's not actually going to break the integration setup, which was what my main concern was when I first started using this and working with it. So it's not going to break the integration setup. So if you don't have a one-to-one mapping, you're not going to have to go through and remap everything every time, which is really nice. All it's really doing is just bring the payments back in. So that all looks good. I don't think we get an additional message. It's just all the check marks. We close it, and then when we look at our invoice, payment amount here, I might not have actually filled in the payment method, so the payment method didn't come in, but there's the payment amount. And again, when we look at the job, we can see that we have an invoice with a balance of 0. So here's the one I just did. The other one I didn't receive a payment on. I just received the payment on the one that we synced just live here just a minute ago. So there it is there. So when you're thinking about QuickBooks Online and you're thinking about payments, you're creating invoices and exporting them as you create them. And you are then periodically, perhaps once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that, performing a full sync so the payments come back in. It's all working out pretty well for you. It's easy to manage once you get into a routine of it, and it's not very labor intensive to get that information to come back in. Okay. So if you have any questions on anything we've covered so far?
No, you know what? We've got a really great crowd today, and I think we're all just looking forward to what you're going to teach us next.
Sweet. Okay, so what we're going to look at next, we have about 12 minutes here, is we're going to look at expenses. So I usually do expenses first, and then I do the invoices, but I thought I'd switch it up today because there's often more questions around the invoices, so I want to make sure we have the bulk of the time for that. But next we're going to look at expenses. So creating an expense, applying it to a job, syncing it with QuickBooks, so that you have a bill in QuickBooks to pay your vendor. So I'm going to navigate to, let's actually jump back to the other system here, and let's look at the job we've been working with so far. So Iced Coffee promo posters. And I'm going to look at the financials. And in order to make this really easy on myself, I'm just going to say that we purchased the photography. So it's $250 for the photography. All I need to do is click on the plus icon, and it brings me to the external expense add page and fills in all the data. Well, all the data that it could possibly know at that juncture. So it filled in the job, the service group, the expense type, the quantity, and the rate, all based on what was on the estimate. If I just select to hover over expenses and add expense, it would bring me to the exact same page, just all the data would be blank. So we'll choose our supplier. Let's work with TRC Printing in this one. Reference number, so this is the invoice number from the vendor. This description box is the memo description box. So this goes into the memo field in QuickBooks. It cannot be more than 250 characters. That is a QuickBooks limitation. The field in QuickBooks is only 250 characters. The field in Function Point is more. I know that our dev team is looking at some solutions to try to communicate that better so that people don't make the mistake of putting too much content in here because it's only supposed to be a small memo that goes into QuickBooks. We then have the actual details of the expense. So the quoted for PO amount if it's applicable, if you need to produce a purchase order. Say it's our 250. We have the description of the actual expense. So this is what's actually being purchased. Quantity, rate, total, tax if you need to pay any tax on this, markup percentage, and the billable value to the job. So we'll save this expense. And actually, I kind of skipped over an important part there. When you select the expense type, it is going to automatically fill in the cost of goods sold. So that's going to auto-populate. If I were to choose something else, Notice how it changes for me automatically. If you don't have the mapping done, then that field will be left blank and the system's not going to let you post it. So my expense is created. I'll select post expense. And then just like before, I choose to run the sync, and it's then going to go over into QuickBooks as a bill to pay. So if we open up QuickBooks here, and we look at our vendors, and then here's TRC printing. There's 2 of them. I'll talk about why in a second. Let's see if that's done. There we go. Alrighty. And let's double check what we have here. So it's invoice number 73874, and here we have invoice number 73874. So here's our bill, and we have the memo description. Notice the tininess of that field. It's tiny. It's a tiny little field. And then we have the item, the description, description of the actual expense, the quantity, the rate, the taxes if I had selected any. So all that information gets put in. Now, the payment of this bill doesn't actually come back into Function Point. So nothing related to the payment of vendor goes into Function Point. And that's it's kind of an interesting one because basically the way that we look at it is if you look at your expenses, the posted status of the expense, so for iced coffee promo posters, my photography expense is exported. Usually the comment that I would make towards the payment thing is, like if someone like someone like a bookkeeper wants to know if an expense has been paid, take a look at it in QuickBooks and you'll see if that bill's been paid. If like an account manager wants to know, hey, we paid the vendor on this, if they look in Function Point and they see the status of exported, then they know that it's currently sitting in your accounts payable and it's waiting to be paid based on whatever your payment terms are. So if you're net 30, net 60, whatever it might be, net hot potato as I like to call it, then that's kind of based on however you operate. But in Function Point, for the average user, if something is exported, as far as an expense goes, it has been paid, or it is awaiting payment to your vendor. The online version is pretty much identical. So we are really doing the exact same thing here. Let's purchase some printing in this case. Choose our vendor. I didn't have one that I wanted here. I guess we'll choose a sync vendor here. Our invoice number, memo description, the quantity, the rates, the actual expense description. Everything is exactly the same. The only difference, just like the invoice, is that we choose to export the expense. And we export the expense. It goes in pretty much instantaneously. When we look at our vendors, we will see our sync vendor, and we'll see the item that we just put over. So it's this item here. And it's all done very, very quickly, pretty much instant, which is, awesome because, who wants to wait for anything, right? So you click export it and boom, right away it's in there. No double entry, no need to, be sending pieces of paper around the office. You don't need to have your AEs gathering up, a bunch of expense forms and then having your bookkeeper manually enter that. All this is syncing over right away. You hit export, boom, it's in the accounting system. Good to go as a bill to pay. So everything's very, very quick. Now, I did want to make a comment on this idea of the underscore vendor thing. You might have a company in your Function Point system that is both a client and a vendor. If that's the case, then if you go to their company details page, then you can actually add a QB vendor name so that you have a client version and a vendor version, but they're all one and the same company in Function Point. And actually, I think I'm reversing that. I think I'm actually reversing that. If you have a vendor who is also a client, then you can have your vendor name and your QB customer name. So if you have data filled in here, whatever information you have here is what's going to show up in QuickBooks as the company's name. So that's just something to keep in mind in case you want to have, going in as different things, whether, when they're a client as opposed to when they're a vendor. So if they're acting as both. That's really all I got. I will be, my team will be sending out an email, related to the content of this webinar, and in that there's going to be instructionals on setting up these fpAccountant items, setting up the QuickBooks integration of the online version, going through a checklist of what will sync. All this information is going to be included in the email. Of course, the recording to the webinar is going to be included as well. So, if you want to follow along with that and set it up while you're watching it, everything that we've gone over today is really all the information that you should need to do a kind of a basic integration, unless there's any kind of funny circumstances, in which case you can let us know about. But otherwise, you should be armed with the knowledge that you need to set that up. So I really hope that everyone found this webinar beneficial today. I want to remind everyone that in 2 weeks' time, we do have the webinar for the more interactive, more advanced QuickBooks syncing conversation. And again, that's going to be something where you're going to be able to get mic'd up, to talk amongst yourselves with myself as well, and kind of go through any challenges you might be experiencing, or certain circumstances that you might want to ask other participants if they have any insights into. So I'd recommend that everyone take a look at that one if you are using the integration, and if you have done a sync. Any questions related to setup, we're not really going to address in that. So make sure that you have it all set up and running for you, and it's more kind of usage that we're going to be talking about. If you do want to get registered for that, you're going to find the badge, the new badge that comes up after this one goes down, is going to take you to the registration for that webinar. Oh, actually, it already is. Look at that. So it's already up there. So if you click on that badge, it'll take you to the registration, and then it'll get you registered for that one. So looking forward to it. Sophie, any questions that we should answer before we wrap up here?
No, I think everyone is starting to peter off a little bit here. So, thanks for spending time with us today, and thanks for taking us through that, Mark.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's time today and joining in and checking this out. I know that this can be a bit of a dry topic sometimes, but it's a very important one, and something that if you have these features set up and working for you, it can save you a tremendous amount of time. Can actually improve your accuracy between the data between systems. It can improve your processes as well, because it takes away additional steps that shouldn't be required. I'm working with an agency right now that is changing from having their bookkeeper do everything to all of a sudden this is going to empower their account executives to actually be the ones that are creating the invoices, and then they sync them, and then the bookkeeper just works with QuickBooks and they just do their accounting work, and they don't have to interact with Function Point that much. And that's really the type of processes that you want to be having as an agency, so that you're not having to hold unnecessary meetings. So account executives can inform the bookkeeper of what to bill, or printing out pieces of paper and having them circulate around the office, writing in amounts that should be invoiced, and then sending that to the bookkeeper so they can manually create them. And these are things that can all be avoided and replaced with a much more efficient system when you're using this integration. So it's a really important aspect of the system. Anyone that's using it is getting huge benefits out of. Once we have a saying in Function Point, once an agency syncs. Once an agency creates an invoice in Function Point and syncs it with QuickBooks, we'll have them as a customer for life. Because once you've done that and it's working well for you, it's really, really difficult to go back to life before it. So I encourage everyone to really put the effort in and try to get this set up and running smoothly for you. As always, if you have any comments on the webinars, if you have any requests, anything that you think we should change, if you're a fan of the word copacetic or anything else, feel free to email us at success@functionpoint.com. Again, that's success@functionpoint.com. Or you can let me know if there's any other words that you find annoying that I use on a regular, or any other comments you might have. So we always appreciate any kind of feedback we can get. Okay, I think I hear some beeping that's letting me know that we're at that time. So again, I appreciate everyone's questions. We're going to keep this open and answer any other ones that do come in, and you're going to be receiving an email with some content shortly, later today, early tomorrow at the latest. And everyone have yourselves a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care. Bye now.